Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to HeartBeat.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to HeartBeat. I am your host, Cindi Bright. Thank you for joining us this evening. We've been talking the last many weeks, as we normally do, about politics, the business of politics when it comes to people. And tonight, we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about the business of people when it comes to business. We do that periodically. You know, I'm a former HR executive, as is my co-host, Stefani Coverson, who comes on with me every week. We'll bring her in here in just a second. But I decided to do a series of shows on this topic for many reasons. Now, we're watching everything unravel in the news every single day about the policies. The Supreme Court is stacked to turn things against people. We're reverting things backwards. And there's a whole lot going on in the business world I'm not sure many people know about or follow the way we do here on HeartBeat. In the past couple of weeks, the Society for Human Resources Management, they're known as SHRM. So when you hear us talk about SHRM tonight, the largest organization that has human resource membership, paying memberships by people, including us, brown and Black people who pay to have memberships into these organizations, they made a decision that they are no longer going to use equity as part of their work, as part of their brand anymore. The one piece of work that requires a lot of effort and a lot of intentionality around, they're no longer doing. In the news this past week also, many companies are rolling back on the DEI. I mean, you've seen, we've had shows about Dr. Phil and how he's challenging it. This past week, Microsoft, if you want to Google and read what Microsoft has done with one of their DEI task force, rolled back. If you want to read what happened on CNN, who was doing segments on Black America, and Abby Phillip, who had done a brilliant piece on Black women's maternal care. All of that work is just being turned back. We are rolling everything way far back. There's so much to talk about with this. We were scheduled to have on the CEO of Certified HR Pros. His name is Marcus Bryant. He got sick last week, so he is rescheduled to come back on with us next week. So this conversation will be more than just this week. Because I think that we need to start asking some tougher questions about HR, about whether we should continue to even have this function anymore. Should we pivot? What are some of our options? What are some of the things we should be thinking about? My co-host, who's on here every week with me, she's brilliant, Stefani Coverson. I'm bringing her in. She is here every week with us talking about a lot of these things, all things HR. She does a lot still in the HR space. I've thrown my middle finger up at HR a long time ago, I think. But Stefani, welcome back here with me this evening. I know this issue and these issues that you continue to work specifically through your business. I believe you might even be a member of SHRM, a paying dues member. You're exposed to all of this. And I just wanted to talk about this tonight because I feel, here's some of my comments, I feel like we're at a crossroads. And so how are you this evening? First off, before we dive in, how you doing? How you feeling about all things going on around you and us?
It has been, we'll just say a week, right? To just sort of see these back-to-back announcements. I found SHRM's announcement particularly distressful, right? Because HR is largely responsible for the people and culture strategies. And so while SHRM's president and CEO says that they weren't discarding equity altogether, they were going to fold it into inclusion, which is curious because those are two absolutely different concepts. So, in essence, what the messaging is that, we're inviting organizations are going to be encouraged to invite folks over, but then lock the door or barricade the back door so that folks can't get in because they're not looking at data to analyze these gaps, right? And so this is hard. This is hard information for folks to process because equity is really about making sure that outcomes, uh, the disparities are not on the basis of race and other qualifiers as well. So it's problematic.
Well, their strategy to fold that in, I think for any, I'll just say 10% educated person realizes that that's just a corporate communication strategy to start slithering back. And I use the term slithering because it's a slimy way, as far as I'm concerned, to not have to continue to fight for or address inequitable systems that are at play in all of these organizations. It's no secret that you can pull up any of their websites and see that they still have not made progress in places of position and authority that is necessary in organizations to make meaningful change. I mean, I've kind of just want to burn it all down, right? Like, I mean, when I wrote my book, which has been published for 3 years now, I mean, this is kind of the thing that I have called for is just, I mean, how much longer? Well, first off, I don't pay any fee dues into them. Should people stop paying dues to this organization? First off, first question,
Mhm.
right?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm done. And I have been a member of SHRM for 10 years. So, I mean, those are not uh, values that I ascribe to. And I'm being very intentional about where I choose my money and to invest. I also have a SHRM certification. So I'm a senior certified professional. My plan is to let that lapse.
Yeah.
And recently, my consulting company, we were an approved recertification provider. So that when HR professionals attended our trainings, they would get credit towards their credentials recertification. So my plan really is to let all of that lapse. And so just right there is, if I didn't invest any more money into SHRM, that's at least $1,000 right there. But I am duly certified. So the Human Resources Certification Institute, through them, I have my SPHR. So I am still going to be certified. So I think it's a very personal decision in the sense that if I only had one set of credentialing, so if I only had my SCP, that's a more difficult, I think, decision to make considering what some employers require for you to be able to work in HR.
Yeah, that's a good point about those certifications. I mean, I let my SPHR, like I never renewed it years ago. I had it for many years, and I never found it to be valuable, except that it's a part of a gatekeeper strategy is to require that to allow or to force people to do it, to say that in order to let you in and in order to give you business. And I've questioned a lot lately. I've questioned whether their certifications, I mean, it brought me no value. So, I'm not saying that's the case with everybody, but it didn't advantage me. It didn't give me an edge on any other opportunities. I just don't know how that is working for folks. I mean, do you have any sense of other people? Like, are these certifications of value, or is it just to prove that you're a part of their entity?
So I will say for me, that it did being certified lent some credibility.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say that for me, particularly as a Black woman, um, you know, moving in spaces, folks tend to question, your qualifications to say X, Y, and Z. So I think from that perspective, um, it was it was beneficial in that way. And then also there were employers that I worked for that required you to either have a certification or be able to get certified, say, in a year. So I think from those particular aspects, um, you know, there were some benefits for having it, but now I'm starting to wonder with this uh, really, I'm going to call it whiplash. It feels this decision with SHRM feels very much like whiplash. Um, I was not asked about it. I didn't receive any surveys. I didn't get any requests for comments. I'm hearing that a lot of other folks in the field, whether they be HR practitioners or DEI practitioners that happen to have a SHRM certification or be a member of SHRM, we're all sort of trying to figure out where this really terrible decision, like who was consulted in this decision. And I say all that to say that I wonder if, SHRM affiliation is going to be the new red hat, in the HR community and field. So
Wh-
I do have some curiosity about the ramifications of this.
Why would the general employee care about any of this? Like, and maybe let me ask this different because, I saw a few people when they reshared the show for tonight. I saw some of the comments that people made. No one, maybe I mean, these are Cindy's words, but no one has any value towards HR anyhow. I mean, it has always been a function of rules enforcing rather than a function of for the people, right? And granted, there are good HR people that are out there that are really trying to do some work that benefit all people, but the general, I watch and see who's risen into big ranks. Some of them if you've known or worked with in the past, um it's just become a very laughable kind of function. No one respects it. I mean, my personal view is that I don't know. I think it harms people more than it helps people. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? And what do you think about other ways of how we can address people issues in business?
Yeah, so to your first question, I think the average employee should care because these practices um, and these policies that would fall under this umbrella have to do with hiring, have to do with even simply down to whether or not uh, you get the interview questions in advance, how your interviews are rated. And so, for example, under an equitable framework, one of the recommendations I would make is questions in advance. Ask people the same questions and have a rubric where everyone is clear about what a preferred answer would be so that I'm don't have the ability to grade somebody super high and somebody else is grading them super low. So really trying to focus on how the folks are answering the questions in terms of uh, making connections between their experience and qualifications and what's being requested. And so when you poof all of that, it allows people to willy-nilly, rate people based on their personal preferences and who answered with confidence but was loud and wrong, all of those different things, employee handbooks, pay parity and pay equity conversations, uh, livable wage. So, looking at other lived experiences that would give folks qualification and insight into performing positions. Like this is going to, I feel like, harm aspects of the entire employee life cycle. To your other question, in terms of uh, what HR should be doing next, number one, I hope practitioners continue to revolt. I have seen or heard very few positive comments about this abrupt about face. So I hope that happens. And then also this idea of um, having having these I think we need to be like clear about HR, right? So HR makes recommendations. So HR makes recommendations, and then ultimately hiring managers or the managers that you're consulting with, um, or other strategic partners are responsible for making the decisions, right? And so we at least had some framework to lean back on to say, well, if you're willing to take this risk, these are the pieces. And so I think this just further erodes the credibility of the profession.
I often wonder, and I'm going to ask, let's see, there was a comment by Danita Price, who is an HR professional also. Hi, Danita. Um, what you were wondering, I'm not sure what your question is. If you could clarify in your comments what you're asking, we can maybe answer that for you. I have just gotten to the point where, you know, what you just described, and I saw the comment around structured interviews, and we're all like going, "Oh, that stuff still exists." But you know, a thought process I have had for years is that we should just eliminate the function in its entirety. And let me describe how I think about solving the problem. Right, like first and foremost, it has never been a respected function. It is very difficult to be seen as a valuable HR professional uh, when you aren't somebody who's got business acumen to begin with. So we'll just start there about, the organizations are trying to make money. And so, really good HR professionals are good at aligning talent, developing people, building cultures and environments that people can thrive. I mean, those are really good HR people who tackle systems, who want to deal with that. That I feel um, is a valuable work, but I don't believe that it needs to be done internal to an organization. And I'll say more about that. Um, so I have often been wrestling with the fact that um, it's just so much wasted overhead money, and the people who are it's nothing but a gatekeeping function, and it has not been successful in terms of uh, the movement of people in the right directions, if you will. It certainly has not taken on a lot of the challenges in the organizations that have to deal with who are impacting other people instead of the what. You've heard me use that phrase a lot. And I think that in today's world, with everything basically unraveling in front of our eyes, if you look at what's going on in the WNBA and what they're calling for, I saw our other co-host Aaron Jones posted a TikTok today where a WNBA person is saying something very similar to what Cindi Bright is saying, where she's saying, why are we not, from a pay perspective, why are we not dealing with a percentage of revenue? I have come at business and said, why are we not just like bringing firms on, Jean Pay Consulting, who's going to be the lead in the Pacific Northwest region, who will take the lead on the culture aspects and business, and Jean Pay and her entity of consultants has an equitable split on the profitability of that business, and that money is disseminated amongst some of the other businesses. And the businesses are accountable for results, not to these people. It eliminates a whole entity of, I'll just say, women that are in the middle management ranks that are destroying people's lives anyhow, anywho, right? I just think there's a way to start tackling this problem different, and in a way that, I'm just going to say, we as Black business owners, or we as women, however you want to think about it, no longer have to report into them. We don't have to put our money into these the SHRMs of the world anymore, right? We don't have to set the bar, the rules to try to keep people out. We deliver results. You negotiate a contract, and here's the 5 deliverables you have to deliver to the business, and here's the threshold of performance you need to meet with them, and you do it. It's what we do as consultants all the time, right? So I just see this problem has got to get tackled from a different lens, because it's not going to change. And when the biggest institution, SHRM, is rolling back with their corporate communication strategy to smooth it over with its membership to try to protect its dues, that's all it is. We know that. Why can't we start to try to solve the people problem in business different? It's my rhetorical question for the night.
Mm-hmm. And I would just first say that I do believe that HR is a gatekeeper based on this myth of meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is absolutely, not true. And that generally, there are a lot of folks that meet the minimum and preferred qualifications for promotions, for hire, for transfer, all of those things. But many times, most times, folks are hired based on who they know,
Mm-hmm.
their connections, and
Mm-hmm.
who are we connected with? People that run in similar circles to us, and we know that those circles are segregated. And
Mm-hmm.
so the people who are, in positions of power and authority to hire and fire folks, most are white.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about quote unquote hiring folks and hiring for quote unquote diversity, there's a lot of conversation about, well, I just want to hire the most qualified people. And so, in and of itself, those kinds of statements are discriminatory and also, frankly, anti Black, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the initial history of this work, all the way back into the 70s and the late 60s, around the Civil Rights Act of 1964, was really shepherded and herded by a lot of Black activists. And so, were they only and solely Black activists? Absolutely not. But the bulk were. And so, this idea of DEI or affirmative action, whatever the name is, because the name keeps changing because for whatever reason, folks don't like the name. And so what do we know? That really what folks don't like isn't the name. It is about closing these gaps and addressing the overrepresentation and overconsumption of folks in these organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to tackle the whole question about the most qualified, but I want to run a quick commercial break and we're going to come back and pick up on that whole issue on the most qualified. We'll be right back.
I'm Patty Cooterer, running for State Insurance Commissioner. When my daughter was born critically ill, I had to fight my insurance company for life-saving care. Now I'm dedicated to ensuring that no family faces that trauma, whether it's healthcare, home, or pet insurance. The Commissioner oversees it all in Washington. I'll bring transparency, fairness, and work to lower costs. Vote for me, and I'll fight for you.
Paid for by Patty for Washington.
As a mom who carried a purse and a badge, Munka Dhingra used that badge as a shield, protecting women and kids, prosecuting violent criminals. Now Munka's the only Democrat for Attorney General who's worked to expand mental health care and wrote the nation's strongest medical privacy law to protect reproductive freedom. So Munka Dhingra's also the only one endorsed by Planned Parenthood votes. Democrat Munka Dhingra for Attorney General.
Welcome back to HeartBeat. I'm your host, Cindi Bright. Thank you for joining us today. We're happy to be able to start doing commercials with our community now. And just so you know, what we are doing, I'm going to bring Stefani back in for this part of the conversation, is ensuring that, particularly in political ads, that we are they are candidates that we stand behind. I'll put it that way, that we feel are aligned with values of prosperity for Brown and Black America. So I just wanted to state that both Senator Cooter and Dhingra has been on HeartBeat. So we're thrilled that they chose to advertise with us. So it's pretty awesome. Stefani, back to, the most qualified. Yes, that is in essence what started these processes of behavioral interviews and what was the term?
Structural interviews.
Yes.
Structured interviews.
Structured interviews. But what has happened from my perspective is that who's most qualified now, the folks who are candidates are actually more qualified now than the folks who have made the determinant on what it takes to get into those jobs. And so now there's this whole threat of bringing in people that are better, stronger, smarter, more educated, all the things, A, B, C, and D. And so that has created a whole nother issue, which is talking about meritocracy, which is a popularity contest, has nothing to do with meritocracy. It's all about who likes who and who's going to gossip and take down her behind the scenes. And so to my point again, the infrastructure, the ecosystem of human resources, processes, and systems has failed. And so how long will we continue to nurture and as a business there are PEO, there are professional employer organizations that can do the administrative function of HR. So if you subcontract that out to a PEO, ADP has, there's a ton of them that do it. Then what you have left are culture, development, leadership, all that sort of thing. Why can't that be taken on by Jamais Pay Consulting here in the Northwest? And that firm sets up the ecosystem and sets up an equitable split on the profitability of that business. And Jamais Pay gets 25% of the profitability. And then you have negotiated that with Bright Consulting. And, it's a way to think about changing the game. And we should be thinking about changing the game because the game, as we know it, doesn't exist. And if number 45 wins in November, life as we all know it won't be the same. So none of that will matter anyhow. All of that stuff won't matter.
So I think my first question is, it's not successful for whom, right? So when we talk about the continued disparities and pay gaps, and pay disparities, who is it not successful for, right? CEOs are well paid. Board members and corporate spaces are well paid. Senior managers are well paid. Um, so, kind of on and on. And so this system is working as intended, right?
Mhm.
For you to be able to um, hire folks that look like you, share your beliefs, share your values, all of those pieces, and not hire people that don't. Um, and so, there are some organizations that are trying to move the needle, and this will be the litmus test, because it's really easy, I think, to roll back these measures, given who has power, right, in our society, particularly in this racial caste system that we're living in. So who has power and money and who doesn't,
Mhm.
right? And so I would say the system is working as intended, um, and until it no longer works for, the people in power or that can write the checks, the business consulting stuff, um, that's that's not going to happen.
Well,
Right.
when you think about the Microsofts of the world, um, or any major organization, they, in order to receive public monies, because they all do, they have to do business with X amount of businesses that are either minority certified or women owned, or there's criteria that they have to meet to prove to the federal government that they are doing business. Um, and so, maybe if the public policy aspect of this, maybe if that is taken on in legislative sessions where that percentage number has to come up, has to get driven up. Um, I just think, and/or kind of to your point about where we're all spending our money anyhow. Um, if we stop spending our money with the entities, and then let's just talk about CNN, right? They just pulled back on their DEI. You know, I mean, I don't want to harm Abby Phillip or Laura Coates. Those are two Black women that are doing phenomenal jobs. But we got to stop tuning in, I mean, to the station and start driving those numbers down, because the only way to create change is to stop putting money in their pocketbooks, right? So, um, and so those are just bigger companies. And then you have the smaller, medium, or nonprofits, which are, I hear, just as atrocious as some of the corporate environments. And so, how do we start impacting? They're getting public money to run those nonprofits. What is it we need to do from a legislative perspective to stop that money from coming into these entities if they're not, in fact, progressing brown and Black people anyhow? We're going to be talking about here in a couple weeks. If people don't know, look what's in the newspaper yesterday on King County and what's happening, the study on Black women. Like, what is it we need to do to start impacting change to happen in that area? Those are the kind of things we should be tackling and taking on as the next
Mhm,
move, right? What's the next
mhm.
move? And
Well, so I think part of these DEI initiatives and strategies, is doing the internal environmental scan to identify these gaps and creating plans for closing the gaps and ensuring that people leaders and managers have the tools, the cultural competency and cultural humility to lead, um, support, and partner with diverse teams.
Mhm.
And so with this, with these initiatives being sunset, or seeing these offices closed and people laid off, I think that it behooves us, particularly as Black women, and other women of color, but I'm going to name Black women in particular, given the report about the county, um, to learn these strategies and what the expectations are. So this, learning and understanding all of sort of this, uh, backroom HR, you know, uh, DEI strategy, to better be able to advocate and navigate or even exit, these environments that are not conducive to our career progression, our professional success, and hell, even our mental, emotional, and physical health.
Mhm. Mhm. Very much so. Yeah, it's disheartening is not even the right word, just to see how I went on today to look at the Washington Employers for Racial Equity website because they kind of stood up, signed by every major company when George Floyd died, right? And so, I mean, they've got every commission and task force to study the problem, right? Like, so I look at that, and I guess I would say on one level, I have compassion for the executive director who's running it. She's a Black woman. I know her. Um, but she can't move that needle. And, you look at, I mean, how much studying needs to get done? Like, we can tell you what the conclusions are. We've all worked in these environments. So at what point, right? Like, at what point do we say the time out? Like, this isn't working for any of us. And Craig Dawson's business, what is it called? I think it's the Black Business Warehouse. He's been doing some really good analysis work on Black businesses, and the gap is getting further and further wider with respect to earning power for smaller micro businesses. In fact, I just read something about, did you catch a recent article about that, about the smaller Black businesses and that they're barely holding on? I think it was specifically here in Washington State. I was reading it because there's just no capital coming into them. There's no, many of us have focused our businesses on issues that impact equity, right? And that is now falling apart. And it's not just necessarily a DEI business, but any issue that deals with inequitable healthcare, you name it, there's a problem in these. And so, isn't it time that we just stop beating our heads against the wall to push it that way and start to try to do something different? That's the question I just continue to ask. Should we be doing something different now?
So I'm a fan of, uh, the magic of the marketplace. That's what Ronald Reagan used to talk about all the time, and I like to put a malicious compliance twist on that, right? So this idea of selecting employers or who you spend your money with, who you do business with, um, we need to start asking questions, right? And so if folks are not, these organizations, that are resisting, um, actually having equitable hiring processes and closing pay gaps and closing promotional gaps, closing employee relation gaps, like all of these people and culture things, um, we need to uh, reconsider where we spend our dollars and where we spend our time. Um, so and also I don't think that organizations have too much longer, right, to navigate and behave in this way. So if, the workforce, let's say, is roughly, 40%, let's say 40% people of color, and I'm encompassing all of the other historically marginalized identities, um, in that composition as well. So you're just not going to promote higher pay, retain like 40% of the available workforce. Like something has to give. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think some of these organizations are going to ultimately go the way of Blockbuster, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
Blockbuster did not want to, put a little razzle dazzle on their business plan and plan for the future. They were overrun, they're gone. Or think
Mm-hmm.
about Kodak or Xerox, these businesses that held on like with a death grip to this business, their business plan, and refused to innovate. They lost their standing in the marketplace. And I think that's going to happen with these organizations that choose to behave like we are in 1954.
Yes, and we're about to vote on 1954 here in 100 and some days.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And I think, well, we also have some important decisions to make there. Because I think about this idea of figuring out, like, of the parties, like, who is the less bigoted, right? Who is the less racist? Who is the less homophobic and transphobic and xenophobic and all the other phobics? Um, and and so, I'm not knocking what anybody else decides to do. So this is, not about that, but thinking through who's malleable, right? And so we don't achieve malleability, if that's a word, just by voting. Like we have to stay on top of it, right? So we're hiring somebody with our votes, and we've got to provide them with performance reviews and performance feedback, and if necessary, a performance improvement plan, right? And firing if if necessary. So
What do
lots
you
to
what do,
learn.
what do you think what do you think is going to happen in November?
I don't know. I will tell you, I'm really concerned about the threats of violence, that whether they're outright or thinly veiled. So like the Project 2025 Heritage Foundation guy, I can't remember his name, that
Mhm.
said this is going to be the second revolution and it'll be as bloodless as the leftists allow it to be. Um, so I think that's a threatening comment and a very interesting comment coming from somebody that has tax exemption status, that's not supposed to be, involved in political matters. Um, so for me, I can't call it, but the vitriol and the outright threats of violence and the thinly veiled threats of violence, are concerning to me.
Yeah, same here. And in the particular hitting the ear, um, I mean, the person who did that is of that party that is promoting violence, and so um, I'm worried. I'm worried about. I mean, when you see like the courts and how they're so stacked to not do the right things, like it's just People continue to say, well, we just continue to fight. Well, how long? Um, and how do we sit here? I mean, I'm older now. I just had a major birthday, and I sit here and I think about, okay, this is how old I am, and I've been dealing with this my entire career. My family dealt with this their entire career. We've made some progress in some areas, and for the most part, not a lot. And so what happens next? And I mean, look what happened in one term of a presidency. Look at how much the world was turned upside down that we still haven't recovered from.
Hmm. I think we don't play the long game. So the same group that has come out with Project 2025 was in cahoots on the contract for America with
Mm.
Newt Gingrich,
Mhm.
right? So they have been playing the long game on, infiltrating the court system, infiltrating federal agencies, all of, what is laid out in Project 2025 is not new. I think
Mhm.
that they have stayed the course on their shenanigans. And here we go again. And this, frankly, dates back to the integration of public schooling,
Mhm.
right? And this idea of abortion and, quote unquote right to life, as long as a life is in the womb. Um, and this idea of galvanizing and honing in on Christian nationalism and evangelicalism. So this has been very much a long game. And another thing that I question, or I have thoughts about, like, for example, the idea of the Tea Party that
Mhm.
sort of started as this fringe in the Republican Party. Um, I think in the Democratic ranks, we have a lot of conversation right around starting a new party. What about infiltrating this one similarly and taking it over, right?
Mhm.
And pushing folks um, uh, to make more progressive decisions and, frankly, some leftist decisions, right?
Mhm.
Because we have been drugged so far to the right that
Mhm.
meeting somebody halfway is still center right,
Mhm.
or even midpoint right.
I heard that those terms being used in the news cycle today and yesterday about um, what commitments the President Biden is making now for the next term. And people are saying he's now going so far left. And I continue to say, I don't understand that term because it's not so far left to, want the same things as the right. It's just been labeled that way in order to make people think that there's something extreme. And so when I push back on that whole notion of this isn't extreme to just want health care, right? Like, so that's not an extreme thing. The Congress people who are pushing for those, like we've seen now with, and this is tied very much into what the show is about today around the impact of people in business. Like what is happening that people don't have access to healthcare, right? That the only way they can get it is through the quote unquote employer. And then the most targeted people for termination all come out of a protected class. And those are the folks that get pushed onto social systems for healthcare or for. Um, so I just think some very basic things need to be attended to that are not extreme. They are what we should expect when we pay high percentages of our income towards taxes. And we should expect to be able to go to the doctor and get medicine and not have to wrestle with insurance companies and yeah, all of that. But the
Absolutely.
the whole business world, back to the topic at hand around the human resources, who is actually fighting for human resources for people in this country? Who is standing up for making sure that I have a whole thing about healthcare. I've been really working on trying to get some folks onto HeartBeat about the whole healthcare impact for us as Black women. It's a big deal. It's a really
Mhm.
big deal, and bigger than I think most people want to or have an understanding of. It's significant.
It's sickening, like literally and figuratively. So
Mhm,
this idea of attaching healthcare to how productive you are, how
mhm,
much you're able to produce and work. And so then those folks who are ill and cannot work, you risk losing your health care. Or if
mhm,
you're lucky enough to live in a state that has an exchange, then, maybe you're getting exchange. But this idea of tying healthcare to labor is to ensure
mhm,
that corporations have a workforce. And
mhm,
so it is, from my perspective, very disappointing, um, to say the least, right? That we fully do not have universal health care,
mhm, mhm,
or even this idea of paying into Social Security,
mhm,
so the deductions from your paycheck. But if you make over, I believe it's $165,000 a year, then you don't pay any more Social Security out of a paycheck. Say if you make $264,000 a year, you're only taxed on your Social Security up to that 165.
mhm.
And so when we talk about Social Security, being insolvent, at some point, well, there's an easy way to fix it right there. What if
Mhm.
everybody had to fully pay 6% on their salary, regardless of income?
I, Stephanie, I just shake my damn head, SMDH, right? Like there's just so much happening right now around us, so much so that we almost can't breathe. And I don't want to even joke about that, but we almost can't breathe because the everything around us is collapsing and the people that it's harming. Look, Amanda Seals, I think, I've been following her much more religiously now, listening to some of the things that she's been talking about. And, uh, you know, we are just at that point. And I don't think when we talk next week, when Marcus Bryant joins us to continue this conversation about, human people in business, we have to start talking deeper about what's next because the system that exists now has simply failed, and it has failed most people. It has failed most people, let alone the brown and black people or disabled people or poor people or people who aren't popular or people who can't afford to wear these shoes. Like it's become so sickening what is happening in business with respect to who survives and who doesn't, and the simple fact that we have to approach our employer as a place to survive. You have to be able to survive it in order, and who can? Who can anymore? It's
Mhm.
terrible. It's why people like you and I stay out on our own. And how many times have you heard me say being on your own is tough and hard, and working in these companies is tough and hard? Pick your hard, right? So I have to pick the hard where I have some mental peace. And it's not for everybody to do what you and I do, Stephanie, around the self-employment. It's not easy to do. But forming the ecosystem like what we have, like what we're talking about with who punts what to who. We talk about that. For our audience, we talk about that all the time, Stephanie and I. Who can do what? Who can, if you can do that, can you take, like, we share amongst each other about what, and we don't have a notion of greed or anything like that. both have a healthy relationship, not just with each other, but with money. I think when we can get to a place like that, I think the world will be better. And I do believe very strongly that it's time to pivot. And so I'm going to continue to drive this conversation forward. I appreciate that you came on with me tonight, Steph, again, because you're in school. I want to let everybody know Stefani is working diligently to get her doctorate degree, and she works like the hours that she works to keep her business together, get her education, furthering her education, doing this show with me. Like it's a lot on your plate. So I thank you for being here with me every week, having these conversations, because we are going to change the world, are we not?
We are. And to your point, it's about this. I think this is what is going to get us, particularly as Black women, through, is being in community, right? Being in community with each other, looking out for each other, providing advice, insight, not gatekeeping the information, sharing what we know, rejecting scarcity. For example, you and I do similar work, like some of our work overlaps, right? And so if you have a scarcity mindset, you're likely to, hoard that work, but there is enough work or enough for all of us. When we work collectively.
We don't do that with each other. Like the thing I really want to emphasize, to audience, is that we don't harm each other. Like we are good about having open conversations with each other, and we just share, like we share in prosperity, because we do some similar things. But Stefani can have 100% of the HR. How many times have you've heard me say that? Please take it, because my stomach for it. But your point is that, like, we have to get to a place of working collaboratively. I just did this event I was telling you about this past week, where I used a lot of my basketball acumen, and I talked a lot about spreading the floor, right? On the court, and what the positions are, and who does what does a point guard do, and how do you spread the floor and get the ball to that person to make sure that that's the game, right? And so as you were watching WNBA and what they're fighting for now for pay, and all the unions and NECA and the things that she's doing, if you haven't seen on Prime Video, it's called The Promise of the Game, or The Promise of the Dream. You got to watch it, because it's powerful about how these women are working together to get and solve. We can't do it single-handedly. We've got to do it in community with each other. So, hey, listen, Steph, thanks for joining me tonight. We are at the hour. I wanted to thank our audience for being with us this evening. Like I said, the CEO of Certified HR Pros, Marcus Bryant, will be with us next week to continue this conversation. And then we are scheduling to do a show on the King County, the report that came out about Black women. There's some stuff. So thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
Half that up in sacks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody.